When it comes to Marilyn Monroe, I think I have a problem, and I need an AA club for Marilyn sycophants. Now, I'm currently 31 years old, and I became obsessed with her at like 29, so very recently. Before that, not only did I not care about her, but also I was one of those smarty pants jackasses who said that they never understood why the hell people are so obsessed with her in the first place, and so many decades after her death. And to this very day, I'm perfectly fine with admitting that she's neither the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, nor the best actress I've ever seen, far from it in fact. And yet, here I am. A couple of years after I got into her, I'm still very deep in this unhealthy obsession I have with a celebrity who died more than 60 years ago at this point. And the question has been popping in my mind very often recently. Why? Just freaking why? Why do I keep spending so many hours of my life watching and rewatching her movies? Why do I keep reading about her and watching documentaries about her and painting her? Like, what the fuck is actually wrong with me? Why won't she leave me alone, and why won't I leave her alone? It has to be noted beforehand, I'm the kind of person who, when I obsess over anything, I'm really talking about obsession. When I get really into something, I might just lock myself up at home and just read and watch stuff about the thing I'm obsessing over for days on end without going out. Over the years, I've always had some obsession over something. Space, history, philosophy, a series of books, or even a single fucking painting. My obsessions are not just something that I take up as a serious hobby. I literally start living for it and caring only about this particular thing and forgetting about anything else I might have going on in my life. This is not a joke. I'm not kidding. That's the kind of person I am when it comes to my obsessions. At this stage, I'm starting to realize it's a psychological ailment, and now for the past 2 years, I have been suffering from the same thing with Marilyn Monroe. Now, probably the weirdest part is how I got obsessed with her in the first place. It was because I was initially obsessed with mortuary science and practices. You know, this morbid passion that people sometimes have to explore death and the circumstances around it, ways and stages of decomposition, funeral practices around different countries, and watching YouTube channels like Ask a Mortician. While reading and watching through this kind of stuff, I just happened to come across the case with the death of Marilyn. How she was having problems with drug addiction, how she died of an overdose, how she was found several hours after her death, then all the details of her autopsy, then the embalming, then the funeral, and the stupid conspiracy theories around her death, which, disclaimer, she wasn't killed, and all of you who think that, please don't be fucking idiots and get your tinfoil hats off. The woman had issues with severe drug addiction, and she ultimately died because of it. And so, I'm ashamed to say this is the way in which I came across Marilyn in my life. It was through the morbid details around her passing. And I'm pretty sure she would have hated my guts for it, because that was probably the last thing she wanted to be remembered for. So my apologies to Marilyn, but it is what it is. I came across her and became obsessed with her for the grossest reason possible. And I've noticed a really strange thing about my Marilyn obsession. Now I've seen most of her movies, or at least the 7 or 8 films she's most famous for. But before that, throughout the first year of the obsession, I hadn't even seen one of her films. Not even a single one. I had gone through all of the details of her life, her struggles with the studios, all her medical problems, all her marriages, all the circumstances around her death, and yet not even one movie I had seen with her. And at some point, this struck me as really weird. How could you be so fascinated by a single person without seeing any of their works? I realized then that I was actually kind of brainwashed into being obsessed with her, because of all the marketing she's been used for all these 60 plus years after her death. The image of Marilyn Monroe, especially her face, is such an iconic image of the human race at this point. Not just of a Hollywood celebrity, but of a female face in general. Of the typical stereotype of a beautiful woman and a famous person. I even tested this out. My grandparents, who live in the most backward and rural part of my country, who were born in the 40s and grew up in communist Bulgaria and have been living in their little commie bubble ever since, Like, in terms of mental and cultural development, they are relics. They have been brought up in the idea of not knowing the rest of the world and being isolated from it, especially the Western world. I guess what I'm trying to say, my grandparents are cavemen, and yet one day I just took a picture of Marilyn and I showed it to my grandma and asked her if she knew who this woman was. And she struggled to remember the name specifically, but she told me she knew who she was, and she was certain about it. So this is what I'd call successful cultural marketing across the decades. It's not just that I knew so much about Marilyn without seeing any of her movies, it's also that cavemen around the world have even heard about her and seen her and can recognize her. While this kind of thing is fascinating, it also makes me a bit sick, because this kind of universal synthetic fame, in Marilyn's case, it's not at all based on her acting skills, which is what she would have wanted. Instead, it's based on her face being ingrained into people's minds as this beautiful smiling face of a pretty woman. And I can tell this is so in my own case as well, because to this day, even though now I've seen her movies, it's still not the reason I'm obsessed with her. I think she's a good actress, but nothing that phenomenal. And her movies are by no means masterpieces. Most of them are just cheesy 50s comedies you'd watch only once and forget about them. And the dramatic ones are good, but the mediocre type of good. Nothing you'd say should get awards for Best Picture or anything. And the reason for me liking these movies are not the actual movies, but just the fact that Marilyn's in them. So instead of her work, I too am obsessed by her face and her looks. Like a total fucking creep, I have spent hours and hours just googling and looking at thousands and thousands of her pictures. And in my case, it's even more ridiculous given the fact that I'm a gay guy, so it's nothing sexual. I am freaking obsessed by her facial features and her body figure as an ideal platonic form of beauty. And I've been trying to unsuccessfully paint her for more than like a year and a half at this point. And I feel so exhausted and tired of her. Sometimes I get sick of looking at her face, and yet the next day, here I am doing it again. And I have to stress, I felt this love-hate thing with all my obsessions. I get so maniacal about something, let's say Titanic or Dune, and then I spend months dealing with it, after which it makes me want to vomit, and I realize I need to go out and touch grass. And then a few days pass of me just touching grass, and then I sink back into the addiction again. I think I'll wrap this recording up. If anyone else feels as insane as me, especially when it comes to the sickeningly propagated image of Marilyn Monroe, please let me know. I feel the need to not feel totally alone in my insanity.